Hi, Norma. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hola, I'm doing so wonderful. So excited to be here. It's always great to connect on, other poderosa Latinas. So I'm so excited for today's conversation as well.
Thank you for making the time. I want to ask you just a quick question for those the or for the listeners who son chismosas like us. How did we ended up meeting?
I'm sorry, say it again?
How did we meet?
Um, the beauty of social media, right? I think through there, I've been able to develop so many beautiful connections, and you are one of them. I think I somehow, you meet one person and then it connects you to another person. You kind of go into like a rabbit hole. And then when I landed onto your page, I was like, oh my gosh, like she's doing such amazing work. And so much of so much of what you do for work really resonates with the need that we need as Latinas. So there's a lot that I'm like, yes, mujer, like tell me more. And so since then, I've been really intrigued by what you offer. So the fact that we get to have a more deeper connection today, conocerlos un poco más.
Yes. I love that. And the admiration is mutual, by the way. That's the reason why I decided to invite you to the podcast. And so go ahead and tell the audience who are you, and we're gonna dive into the topic of how to heal a breakup, which I'm like, tráiganme las palomitas.
Sí. Bueno, my name is Norma Garcia. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a breakup coach, and a Reiki healer. I live in Los Angeles, California, and over the last 10 years, I have been passionate in supporting our Latino comunidad, in breaking stigma from mental health, helping our community also heal from generational trauma. So, in doing a lot of my therapy work, I saw that there was a huge demand for focus on healing from breakups. And so that's what kind of led me to really look into creating a curriculum specifically for breakups.
I'm getting goosebumps. I'm like, my 25-year-old version would have really benefit from you. Now, there are so many niches when it comes to choosing coaching, and I also want to highlight the fact that you are still a licensed therapist, but now you have incorporated coaching as an additional income stream. But why specifically breakup?
Ooh, such a $1 million question there. So a lot of it is because of my personal experience. I myself, and I know there's a lot of mujeres and men who like have that one breakup that really really shakes you to your core. And for me, I believe that breakups is an awakening for us. And that's exactly what happened with me when I went through my breakup, which was over 7 years ago. The healing that I did, the transformations that I went through, and the person that I became, and I'm still becoming, right? Because it's a lifelong, journey of healing. That really inspired me to be able to share this wisdom, share my knowledge, as well as like my therapy background, to be able to create something that is unique and special, to be able to help other women also heal. Of course, there's this wish to like, I wish there was like a fast forward button just to get through the breakup or healed, right? So that isn't possible. However, in my program, I do create it very intentional so that you're very conscious in terms of what you do with your time and to be able to reduce that suffering, right? So I do have a lot of, it naturally happened too that I was attracting a lot of, clients that were going through relationship stuff, whether it's they're in a current relationship, they're in a toxic relationship, they went through a breakup or through a divorce. So somehow my therapy caseload was a lot of relationship work. So combining my personal story and my expertise as a therapist, it really inspired me to want to do this specific niche. And as I was researching, I also saw that there was a gap in there being this kind of support specifically for Latinas and women of color. So this for me was also an opportunity to be able to fill that gap, and be able to create something special.
I'm like, I love everything you're saying now. Let's go back to your story because you said it happened 7 years ago. Why did you feel that you had to heal from that specific like breakup that happened to you? And feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with.
See, yeah, absolutely. Um, so that to me was like the first, well, the breakup as an adult that I felt was the most heartbreaking, where I was devastated. Like I said, it really shook me to the core, where I was lost. Um, I was lost. I was devastated. I went through all like the emotions you can think of when you go through a heartbreak. The thing was too that that was the first time that I felt the most alive, meaning that I actually felt like my emotion. I was raw. I was vulnerable. And all that I had to do in that moment, right? Like my mindset, right? Like very negative, like I'm not worthy, like he doesn't love me, right? From my body, feeling completely like anxious and like depressed, and just the way that it was affecting like my functioning. Like it was hard for me to show up for work. It was hard for me to show up in my friendships. The way that it affected me really had me take a look deep within myself. That as I started healing that breakup, I realized that it wasn't just about the breakup. It was more about like really looking deep within myself and what came up for me in terms of just even like my childhood wounds, right? So something that I realized was that my first heartbreak really wasn't from this. My first heartbreak began from like, my experience as a child, like with my parents. Um, but in going through this process, that sort of made me realize and have to look deep and even to my past, right? And even as a therapist, right? Like I'm like, oh, I got this, I'm good. Like I have all the tools, right? But it's different, holding space for someone else and guiding them in that process versus when it is for you, right? Like, so estaba destrozada to the point that like I knew that I was like in desperation mode where I just knew I needed to move on. I needed to heal. I needed to let go of not just this person, but also of any limited beliefs that I had surrounding like love, surrounding, even healthy relationships. This specific relationship, it was unhealthy. There was narcissism involved. It was toxic. So that adds another layer, right? In terms of like how deep the healing, had to be done. And once I made that decision, like, you know what, I'm choosing myself. I'm going to decide to heal. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I went back to therapy. I started doing new things for myself, hobbies, connected with like my support system. And then once I felt I was able to like, okay, like I feel a bit more stable, that's when I actually took, I was like, I'm going to, go all in, take all the risks ever. Right now is my chance to just be with myself and do whatever I wanted and really discover myself, because it is a rediscovery, right? You're rediscovering who you are coming out of a relationship, and now you're single, and I became single when I hit 30, right? And so when you hit 30, right, it's like, I'm supposed to be married, I'm supposed to have kids, like all of the conditional things that I'm supposed to be, I wasn't. So it was a very, very layered, process. And then I was able to, quit my job. Y me fui de viajar. I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave. I took off and traveled for 6.5 months around the world by myself in my backpack. And my intention there was like, the only person that I have to consult with or ask was myself. What does Norma want to do? Where does she want to go? That was the kind of problem I wanted to have, where I was going to sit with myself and only have to consult with myself in terms of what I wanted, because I'm a very people pleaser. So I'm always about like everyone else. So I had to literally remove myself from them, even my family, my friends, and everything, to be like, no, what does Norma want?
I love that. I love that question that you asked yourself because you were able to, just based on what you're telling me right now, you were able to move from I don't love myself to I am freaking madly in love with myself and I'm going to do whatever I want. And I just love listening to this journey. I'm sure at that time it was painful and it didn't feel good, but you made that decision and here you are now helping other mujeres. You mentioned age, which I'm so glad that you brought that, because as Latinas,
Yes.
we are pressured to do so many things. One of them is the expectation of, by this age I have to be married, by this age I have to have kids. And I've actually experienced that myself, as well, where I was 21 and people were asking me, when are you going to have kids? And I was like, Not anytime soon." But how do you feel that cultural expectation really plays on, not just on your personal journey, but also other mujeres that feel that they almost like have, quote unquote, an expiration date? And how does that translate into women not loving themselves because of that? I don't even have time to like explore what I think or what I want. I just have to get to the finish line, which is get married and have kids.
Absolutely. No, culture is one of the biggest things that plays a huge role, right? I myself, I'm very traditional, connected to like my family and the cultural values. So it's one thing, right, is just, our existence as humans, right, already culturally what that means. But then when it has to do with like relationships, right, and where we're supposed to be, right, it creates a lot of weight, right, a lot of weight that like their expectations of like society and our family and our culture, like we take it on, like we also, their belief system becomes our belief system, right? And when we go through that breakup, it actually requires us to really challenge and break that, right? Break that, that belief system of like, wait a minute, like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. However, this is my life, right? Like, what do I want for myself? And even to this day, right, that I've been single, for years now, like, I still get asked, like, when you're going to get married, like, when you're going to, get in a relationship, when you're going to have kids. And it is difficult to manage, especially because even though it comes from a genuine place, like, our family is just concerned for us. Like, I know this is a gift for me. Like, my mom doesn't want me to be by myself, which I appreciate her concern, right? But at the same time, it's about also, right, staying true to who you are and what you want, and being able to set those boundaries, right, and being able to, challenge those norms. And so a lot of the work that I do with my clients is, identifying their narrative, right, their narrative in terms of love and relationships, and how culture plays a role in that narrative. And in that process of doing like the mindset work, we work on also reframing some of those narratives to align with who you are in that moment.
That is so good. I want to know, why are my moms so obsessed with making sure that as Latinas we have a man to take care of us? Why? Like, why?
Yeah, I know. I'm there with you, and and when we think of like generational, right? Like it comes from abuelitas, from other abuelitas, right? Tradition, right? In terms of the way that we're supposed to, live. And even I think for myself, that I'm a first gen, right? Like my parents who came to the States, right? Like they still were able to like bring on their culture, their traditions, and their rituals, which I do embody myself as well. But then also being born here in America, right? You also kind of assimilate to some of like the Western, norms. So I think for us, it puts us in an interesting position to be like, wait a minute, like what's like cultural and what's like my own identity, if that makes sense, and
Yeah.
especially, because our moms and our grandmothers, they lived life a different way, right? And they want better for us. At the same time, they think that a man being in our lives is what's going to make it better. And that's something like I struggle with because I'm very independent. And one thing that like indirectly, I learned from my parent family dynamic is that like I always want to have my own backbone, right?
Yes.
Have myself, to rely on. But that can be a difficult concept, right, for our parents to understand, right? Because to them, right, they have lived their lives as like, marriage, kids, like that's kind of like the path. But I've been todo like I am, I challenge the norms, I do things right the way that I want to do that. And that comes with a lot of like criticism, que va a decir la gente, que van a decir, to the point, right? This is so silly for me to share, but to the point that I've had family members think that I am bisexual or that I am a lesbian because I'm not in a relationship.
And that is just so crazy because it goes back to the cultural belief of have a relationship. Like it doesn't matter if it's a horrible relationship, but at least you have the man, right? Just to kind of quote unquote check the box of like I am dating. And I have a very healthy relationship with my husband. But I've also had those toxic relationship in the past. I was engaged. The listeners, I don't think I've ever shared this, but I was engaged once and I broke it off because I it turned out to be what you're describing, like someone who was very narcissist. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, no way. Like, red flag. Like, I just felt like it didn't, like that I didn't belong in that relationship anymore. And I remember my mom telling me, like, how dare you to break up with this person? Like, you're 30 years old
Mhm.
and ya te estás poniendo vieja, no vas a poder tener hijos. Like, you're not going to be doing all of these. But I feel called to just end that relationship. And I didn't date for a long time. And yeah, I was getting the same criticism like, hey, are you like bisexual? Are you gay? Like, what's happening to you? And even my family members were arranging like dates for me without me even knowing, like, hey, vamos a la fiesta. And I'm like, okay. And then behind my back, they're like, le vamos a presentar a so and so. And so it's so crazy that our family sometimes it's a little bit guilty of pushing us into that I need to be in a relationship to be happy. Now, you talk about risk, which I mean, I've been following you. I know you, and I'm like, I just love the audacity of I'm gonna travel, I'm gonna go places by myself. What was Norma thinking when you were making those decisions that a lot of people don't make because that is expansion and that is growth, and not everyone has the bond for taking risks? Like, give us the chisme.
See, oh my gosh. I love sharing my story about that time when I traveled because for me, it was such a empowering, liberating, like, hasta yo me sorprendí. I'm like, wow, like I did that. Um, but I've always had a passion for travel, and every time I would travel, I would leave con las ganas. Like, I wish I can stay here longer. I wish I can stay here longer, So I did travel, I had like a lot of years under my belt, and when the breakup happened and I was really going to doing like my deep healing and really asking myself, like, reevaluating my values, my goals, what I want in life. But even one thing that really was instrumental during that time was really pouring into myself, right? That journey of like self love. And for me, that self love for me was doing something that was that aligned with my passions, but something that was going to be bold and courageous, right? I wanted to really do something that for me, right, it was out of my comfort zone. It was like the biggest, like, courageous act I could have done. I mean, from quitting my job, like I straight was like, I'm quitting, right? To then like, okay, I bought my one-way flight, right? I didn't even tell my parents how long I was going to be gone because they were already, having a hard time accepting that I was going to be gone, especially como mujer, like, tú como mujer, ¿qué vas a hacer allá sola? Um, but everything that I did in that time, from my mindset, from regulating my emotions, from, really tapping into like my soul, like what is going to fire my soul, right? And again, traveling for me has been the one thing. Once I discovered it, it really became my identity and also my form of therapy. That this time I was like, you know what, I have nothing to lose. And interestingly, when I was in that relationship, I had told my ex, I was like, hey, like, what are your thoughts if I were to take off for like 3 months, right? Just kind of testing the waters. And he's like, if you leave, we're done, you know? So when the breakup happened, I was like, you know what? Like, I have no one to hold me back, no one to tell me what to do. At that time, financially too, I was like paying off some debt. I got like a second job. I really set myself up so that way I can make it happen. And I didn't care like any noise that I would hear about like, what are you doing? Like, are you crazy? I was like this is about me. This is how I'm putting myself first. I'm choosing myself, and this is the best way that I know that I'm going to pour into myself, because I was also trying to get away from my people tendencies, right? Like everything I do for others. As a therapist, I'm all about others, right? For my family, it's all about them, and that was the one environment where I felt that like it was going to be all about me, and it absolutely was, because I did exactly what I wanted, when I wanted, and how I wanted. And that, was a moment when, I felt like I completely transformed, and everything I had done, it took a year, like from the breakup to taking off. So it was like everything that I have been practicing and embodying on my trip, I really put it into practice.
I'm like, I love that. I'm like, I wish I could be like a fly on the wall just watching you make decisions, because I'm like, that is, yeah, it's so courageous. You already said that word. And I'm just like, wow. Now, Norma, a lot of mujeres are afraid to be alone. Like you just told us, you haven't dated for a long time. Your people are like concerned, quote unquote, right? Like you're not, but a lot of women, a lot of mujeres can't be alone. So what would you say to the mujer who's like, I had a breakup, on to the next one?
Yes, that's a great thing you bring up, right? Because fear is everything. Fear is everywhere, right? Fear is what is a barrier to a lot of our decisions, especially when we would talk about relationships, right? Like, do we stay or do we go? And there is this deep rooted fear about like, what does it mean if I'm going to be by myself? What is it going to mean if I'm without that person, right? Like, it's so scary to imagine life, what it would be like, right? Or even if you're already in it, right? Because it's hard to sit with ourselves. It's hard to really feel our emotions, right? So when women jump into relationships, right, typically is, because they want to fill that void, or they're not doing like the inner work. But in all reality, the same kind of issues, right? Like come into the next relationship. So for anyone that are feeling their fears, I would say really lean into it, right? Befriend the fear. Like the fear is our friend too. Like we need to also be able to embrace that fear and do things that are scary, because that's where the growth is. That's where the transformation is. That's where you are able to truly like unlock your potential, truly meet that version of yourself that is wanting to be seen, is wanting, to come out. So for anyone that either is scared to leave a relationship or scared, to be single, I would highly recommend, really exploring that and seeing, what blessings can come out of that fear. And don't get me wrong, like it is scary, right? And for some people, it's about also like having a plan, right, or setting yourself up, right, where it is, yes, maybe we don't have that partnership, right, but where can we also fill our cup, you know? And one thing that happens when we come out of a relationship, right, is that we realize that a lot of our validation, a lot of our worth, or a lot of our love, right? We get it from an external factor, so that when that external factor is no longer there, that's when we feel like, oh my gosh, like I can't live without this person. Like we put so much meaning to that partnership. And so part of going through a breakup and healing is about how do you reconnect and find your own worth, which is innate. How do you find, how do you start loving yourself, right? And really allowing that to grow, so that way when you get into another relationship, right, it's not so much of like how are they going to fill me, it's more like how are they going to enhance me. And if it is that, you need support, going through, your emotions, definitely I recommend, seeking, support, whether it's from your support system, but even like professional help, like going to a therapist or, a coach, or anywhere where you feel that you're going to get supported in the way that you want.
Yes, we all need that support. Like it's not just choosing, do I work with this person or do I work with this person? It's like we need the board of directors. Now, Norma, you talk about somatic healing. Uh, I know what it means, but also can you give us some examples of what are some of the things that you do as Norma to increase your self-worth, like the somatic practices that perhaps you implement? Because a lot of mujeres are like, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna lift super heavy, I'm gonna go on a long run. I'm talking about the old version of myself, by the way. I'm gonna do all of these things to just avoid my emotions, right? So tell us, what is it that you do in terms of like the somatic practices?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, the somatic work is something that I started embodying more recently, in which, soma means the body, right? And so, for when we experience our emotions, right, a lot of the times it's in our head, right, like our thoughts, right? And so the somatic is really being able to tune into your body and having like the mind body connection, right? So with that work, it's really about being able to tune into the body in terms of where it is in our body, right, that we have our emotions, right? Especially if we experience trauma, right, it is stored in our body, right? And so part of the somatic is be able to recognize the physiological part of what's happening with our body, and also being able to understand what emotions, right? The thing is, our body is like a vessel, right? Our body communicates to us what is going on. The thing is that when we ignore it, or we're in autopilot, right? We're not really tapping into or releasing that energy or those emotions. So some things that I do, for myself, I also went back to therapy this year, and with my therapist, I specifically too wanted a therapist that also did somatic work. And so, some of the things that I've been practicing is when I experience my emotions, I sit with it, I breathe through it, and I see where it is in my body that it is that I'm feeling. And sometimes it could be hard to try to connect, right? Because it's like I don't feel anything. There's no sensations, right? But it's the practice of really sitting, a lot of breath work, a lot of also doing um, bilateral stimulation movements. So, like tapping into different points in our body to release those emotions. It can also be like movement, stretching, kind of like embracing this like flow, connecting to your emotions, or sometimes it could be even like dancing, for example, right? Like really letting yourself be free, letting yourself like go. A lot of movement. And a lot of also being able to just really have awareness, right, of the body. Also, like I've been doing a lot of yoga as well, specifically not just going to yoga classes, but like specific like yoga poses that also help, release certain, especially with as an energy healer, I also work with the chakras, right? So figuring out like where it is that we're blocked within our chakra, and be able to release some of that energy that is stored there. I've been incorporating like a lot of like walking. So a lot of it, somatic doesn't have to be anything so difficult. It could be, really just sitting with like having awareness is always like the first piece, right? Awareness of what is happening, tuning into that, and then being able to do something, for it as well. And
I
so,
love that. And it sounds to me like we got to move our body, right? Like, especially when mujeres are going through a breakup, it's like the immediate reaction is me voy a quedar en la cama. I'm going to binge like 20 Netflix shows. I'm going to eat very unhealthy and I'm just going to cry it out, which, crying it out is good, but also push yourself to move your body, because that's when you're going to release all of these tensions that you feel. Now, I want to ask you another question, and this is about your journey to entrepreneurship. What are some of the biggest lessons that you learned about your own capacity to expand and grow as an entrepreneur?
love that question. It's definitely still an ongoing process. Something that kind of going back to like the somatic parts of it. One thing that I realized when I started entrepreneurship is that my nervous system was completely dysregulated. And I didn't realize that because, I realized that then because prior to that, I was always on autopilot, like go, 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 right? So when I started entrepreneurship, where it was a more slower pace, like still figuring things out, right? I have a lot of my core limited beliefs came up, right? Like I'm not worthy, I'm gonna fail, like is this even for me? Like I should have continued back to my job. So like my body, my nervous system was just like, like, And so that's when I was like, oh my gosh, like there's something happening to my body as I am experiencing entrepreneurship. Like I said, like I can take risks. So even like leaving, for 6 months, like, yeah, it was risky, it was courageous, and it took a lot. But nothing like leaving your 9 to 5 job to go into entrepreneurship, right? Where I had the 9 to 5 mentality, right? Like stability and security, right? To then like, you got to figure this out. And within that, it was a lot of like my own, like I've done a lot of healing within this process where I needed to really reset myself, understand what was happening with like my nervous system, be able to regulate myself. So that way I can make decisions for my business, because what was happening is that I was having a lot of doubts, right? I was questioning everything. I wasn't able to make decisions, right? And once I was able to do that work, right, like really like look at myself to be able to know what I needed to do so that I can make these decisions that are, are big decisions, right? This is your business, right? Were really, really difficult. However, it's what's making me the business owner that I am now, where I'm able to show up more authentically, more healed, right? And be able to make, better decisions, so that's one part of it. The other part that I learned as well was like the importance of community and asking for help, right? So knowing that like I don't have to do this alone. There's other mujeres, Latinas, first gens, women of color that are doing the exact same thing. Maybe, even some that were also therapists or coaches, but even other women that are in different niches, right? That I realized like I was yearning for that community, that I had to ask for help too, and that's why I would like reach out, to people like, hey, like, are you open to, for a chat? I would pick people's brain. So I allowed myself to also receive and be able to ask other women for help and not feel like I have to do this alone. And within that, in this last year, I just feel so blessed, and all the beautiful connections that I'm able, to create a lot through social media.
Yes.
Um, that it just, to me, like it makes me the mujer in my business that I am today.
And I love watching you. I believe you just celebrated a full year into your own business.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Norma? You can answer me that, and then the next question is tell people where they can find you as well. So what's next for you? We'll start there.
Yeah, so this last year was a lot of like trial and error, learning. Um, but I think what's next, I want to continue, scaling and expanding, my business. Right now, I offer one-on-one coaching. However, I do want to also create curriculum around like a group format. In the future, I would love to also create some like retreats, and perhaps incorporate some travel in there too. So, like, for women that either are experiencing a heartbreak or are going through something with like their relationships, being able to also, travel as a way to heal. And that's been always one of my dreams. Like, how can I incorporate travel into like my coaching business? So that's one thing. The other thing too is part of my journey too is also myself continuing to heal and more like spiritually. So I've also been, tapping into other forms of modalities such as like Reiki. I'm excited to share that next weekend I am going to be trained for like sound baths. I'm finding different ways where not just in my want to be able to help one-on-one, but I want to be able to create like events, wellness events, retreats that are more like for community.
I love that. And I myself, so that's one of the things that I do as an entrepreneur now. Like I go to sound baths, I go get limpias. Like I grew up thinking that limpias were such a scary thing because I grew up in a very religious household. But now as an entrepreneur, I'm like, I'm gonna do my Reiki, I'm gonna do my limpias. Like I'm just doing it all. And my body loves that. So I love that for you so much. Now, where can people find you?
Good question. So you can find me. My Instagram handle is normally_healing. That's like my main platform. My website is coming soon. So stay tuned for that as well. And yeah, pretty much those are like, I'm also on LinkedIn, but my focus really, I can only do one thing at a time, and right now Instagram is what takes my time and space. So eventually I would, I am also looking, to hire, expand my business into a team, because right now I've been a one woman show. So
But you're doing so good, and I just want to say, like, as a Latina, um watching your growth and watching to like the way you're taking risk and really like how you're like falling in love with yourself, like I just love that about you, and I love that you're helping other mujeres. So thank you so much for being here on the show. Te deseo la mejor de las suertes, la abundancia, and yes to more healing. We definitely need that.
so much. I had so much fun speaking with you today. Oh, did it cut out? No.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. I had so much fun being here and such a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to just share this conversation with you. I'm all things healing. So the fact that, as Latinas too, we're able to break the stigma. We're talking about this to raise awareness, and and then at the end is that, how are we supporting each other, right? But
Absolutely, community over competition.
yes, we heal in community.
Thank you, Norma.